Welcome to Real Bear Reviews, your paradise for movie lovers. Thank you for supporting our channel. Your love keeps us alive and growing.
The men killed by that man were not ordinary people, they were all the most renowned assassins in the world. However, when faced with Joe, Europe's greatest assassin, even with more people, it was all in vain. However, it was Joe himself who brought this trouble upon himself. He placed a bounty on his own life and invited all the world's assassins to come and take his head. Initially, Joe had no intention of fighting back. 2 million would easily go to anyone who completed the mission. But a sudden incident made him change his mind, and it all had to do with a woman. A few days ago, in an opera house, a contemporary art performance was taking place. A tycoon was sitting in the VIP room, quietly enjoying the show. Outside, bodyguards were on patrol, one of whom was adjusting his uniform in a mirror. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a black leather shoe sticking out from under the curtain. His heart tightened, and he tiptoed closer, pulling the curtain back. Joe appeared, his eyes as still as a frozen lake. He turned his back and walked straight toward the target's room, pretending to be on the phone. A bodyguard at the end of the corridor came to stop him. Before he could react, Joe raised his hand and fired. The muffled gunshot only made a soft thud, and the bodyguard silently collapsed onto the carpet. When he pulled back the curtain and entered, the target turned his head, saw Joe, and immediately understood that he was unlikely to escape death. He quickly offered a price 3 times higher to beg for his life, but Joe only replied, "That's not how you play the game," and immediately pulled the trigger. The woman with him was stunned. Joe just gestured for her to stay silent and then. The woman quickly ran out and ran straight into the bodyguard guarding the door. The bodyguard took out his radio to call his teammates, but there was only static in the earpiece. He then realized that the other 2 teammates had long since gone quiet. When he pushed open the room door, he only saw the boss slumped over the table. Joe turned his back to leave when suddenly a sharp pain pierced his temple. Everything in front of him began to blur. He had to grab the wall to try and stand steady. On the other side, the bodyguard ran into the corridor and ran into the theater security staff, who immediately stopped him for questioning. Without a word, he drew his gun, shot the security guard, and then rushed into a room and onto the stage. But before he could stand firm, a bullet from the balcony above hit him, and he collapsed right in the middle of the stage. The entire auditorium erupted. Screaming like a tidal wave engulfed the opera house. A dancer named Lucy was knocked down by the panicked crowd. Thousands of feet trampled chaotically around her as she was almost swallowed by fear. A strong hand lifted her. It wasn't until she was put down at the emergency exit behind the theater that Lucy finally saw the man who had lifted her. A chiseled face with a faint scar above his eyebrow and eyes that held a tiredness she couldn't understand. Just as she was about to ask his name, Joe suddenly felt his head hurt as if it were about to split open. Lucy wanted to ask a passerby if anyone had any painkillers. But when she turned back, the man had vanished into the night. When Joe returned home, the dizziness had not yet subsided. He reached for the painkiller bottle, but his fingertips touched something cold. It was a pink phone, with a ballerina on the lock screen. He must have put it in his pocket when he carried Lucy. The next day, Joe went to the hospital for an MRI. The doctor shook his head, pointing at the scan and saying there were no signs of a pathological condition in his brain for now, but his job definitely involved severe impacts, some soft tissue damage, or nerve compression. The MRI couldn't detect it. The doctor advised him that it was time to reconsider his lifestyle. Joe said nothing, left a tube of blood, and left. He went to see his boss, Ken. The apartment was filled with the smell of cigars. Joe said he had seen a doctor. A hint of worry flashed in Ken's eyes, but Joe reassured him there was nothing to worry about. He went on to say that he was beginning to question his reasons for killing people. Ken said that the targets were all vicious and cruel, so he should consider it as an act of divine retribution. When Joe heard this, he asked how people would judge him after he died. Ken replied that it was God's business. Our job is to send those scumbags to meet God. Joe nodded and accepted the 500,000 reward for this mission. Ken advised him to take a break, not to forget about life because of his work. Hearing this, he remembered the pink phone. Another scene appeared, Lucy's figure spinning on the glass of the dance studio. Joe stood quietly at the door, waiting for her to stop before stepping forward to return the phone. Lucy's eyes lit up, and her cheeks flushed. She said she was very grateful for what he did yesterday and wanted to invite him to dinner. Just as Joe was about to refuse, Lucy took out a photo and wrote her phone number on the back. Leaving the studio, Joe clenched the photo and threw it in the trash can. But after walking a few steps, he stopped, turned around, and picked the photo up from the trash can. That night, Joe sat by the window, facing his phone screen. He typed and then deleted, finally sending a message. Are you free tonight? As night fell, in a candlelit restaurant, Lucy smiled as she told interesting stories from her dance troupe. Joe listened, a rare smile appearing on his face. Lucy said that she had dreamed of dancing ballet since she was a child, and to afford the lessons, her mother had worked 2 jobs a day without a single complaint. Therefore, ballet was not just a hobby for her. Joe also confided that he was an orphan. At 18, he took his draft notice and joined the army. Now, he was still doing the same job, but deep down, he had long since intended to retire. The conversation between the two became unusually relaxed and harmonious. Without realizing it, the look in their eyes for each other became even more radiant. In the following days, they started dating frequently. Joe spent his free time handling a few remaining missions and was almost always with Lucy. They were immersed in a loving and intimate relationship. Everything continued as if they were about to get married when the unexpected happened. The blood test results were in. Joe had Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a terminal illness that would gradually destroy his nervous function. For an assassin, losing neural control was almost synonymous with the end of their career. The cruelest part was that there was no known cure for this disease, and he only had a maximum of 3 months to live. The doctor's words were like an ice block hitting his heart. He couldn't accept this result. He had just found the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with, but now separation was already predetermined. His heart was filled with helplessness. Leaving the hospital, Joe drove home. He searched for information about this disease online. There were hundreds of thousands of patients worldwide, but not a single case had been cured. He only had 3 months to live. Thinking of this, Joe took out his gun. But when he saw the photo of him and Lucy hugging on his phone, he felt that he needed to do something before he died. So he went to see his boss, Ken. For Joe, Ken was not just a boss, but also like a family member, a mentor, and a friend. When Ken heard Joe talk about his illness, he was also very surprised. He didn't expect things to be this serious. Joe, as if he had made up his mind, took out a portion of his savings and asked Ken to help him buy an accident insurance policy with Lucy as the beneficiary. However, accident insurance does not cover suicide or natural death. So he was willing to pay Ken to hire assassins to kill him. Ken looked at Joe as if he were his own son. Although he couldn't give him hope, he also didn't want to do something so cruel. Feelings are intangible, but sometimes they can cause bone-deep pain. Joe understood Ken's thoughts, said nothing more, stood up, and left his place. He turned his back and walked in a different direction. That place was the home of Bella, his sworn enemy for many years. As soon as they met, Joe said he wanted to sign a contract with him. Bella introduced Joe to his subordinate, Mike, and said that Joe was the top assassin in Europe. Then Joe explained his purpose. He was willing to pay $2 million for Bella to find someone to kill him. Bella was stunned. He didn't expect the person he always wanted to eliminate to voluntarily make this request. Without thinking, he immediately agreed. The two agreed to start the mission after midnight. After saying this, Joe turned and left. As soon as Joe left, Bella was eager to announce the manhunt. Because Joe was a formidable opponent, Bella specially selected a team of top assassins in the world, with the determination to deal with Joe in the first round. After arranging everything, Joe didn't go home but went to the opera house to wait for Lucy to get off work. The two met and were as intimate as ever. Happiness shone in their eyes, and all those moments were recorded by Mike, Bella's subordinate, with his phone. After a few short conversations, Lucy noticed that Joe seemed to have something on his mind. She wanted to know what happened to him, but unexpectedly, Joe directly said goodbye, saying that he needed to rethink what he really wanted. Lucy said that Joe was talking nonsense because they could clearly bring happiness to each other. They clearly loved each other deeply, but from Joe's attitude, she realized he had made up his mind. After kissing him, she turned and walked away without looking back. Joe was in extreme pain but could only watch helplessly as Lucy left. It seemed to be the only thing he could do. Soon after, Joe returned home. He didn't lock the door, he even turned on all the lights. After a few strong drinks, he gathered all his courage and sent Lucy a voice message. It was a farewell monologue, explaining that he was forced to break up because he had a serious illness and that Lucy was the person he had been looking for his entire life. Lucy, who was in deep pain, immediately saw Joe's voice message. Just as she was listening, Joe received a call from his personal doctor. The doctor informed Joe that he did not have Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It was the fault of the laboratory staff. They had confused his file with another patient's. Joe asked about his headache and double vision. The doctor said the cause was unclear and asked if he had had his eyes checked, as it could be caused by the nerves around his eyes causing the headache. At this time, there were only 5 minutes left until the hunt began. Joe was extremely anxious. At the same time, the first assassin team had arrived below his building. It was a team of Koreans, known for their brutal and ostentatious style. After each mission, the scene usually had many dead people with various methods, and the weapons they used were also very diverse. Since Joe hadn't locked the door, they easily entered the room. Joe said this was a mistake and wanted to cancel the contract. But the assassins only cared about the money. After the leader gave the order, the manhunt officially began. The assassin in the red shirt made a fancy move but was knocked down by Joe. Then Joe's shoulder was slashed, and Joe immediately confronted the female assassin with the axe. He didn't expend too much effort, with just a series of moves, he quickly took her down. The assassin in the red shirt saw this and lost control of his emotions, but in the face of absolute power, anger and shouting were useless, and they even accelerated his death. Immediately after, the boss ordered his henchmen to continue the attack with samurai swords. As a result, the sword was thrown out by a single blow before it even touched Joe. Then the girl with the red hair and a strange weapon came forward, she looked very fierce, and she swung her weapon with great force, even managing to slash Joe's shoulder. But when Joe counterattacked, she couldn't even withstand a single blow. After dealing with all his subordinates, the boss still remained calm, his mouth constantly mocking and provoking. However, what no one expected was that he was the weakest one. He hadn't even had time to strike before Joe used the curved blue knife on his shoulder to slash him straight in the face. Afterward, Joe even lit a cigarette for him. At this moment, the red-haired girl was not completely dead, and she staggered to her feet. Joe didn't even pay attention, he had easily dealt with the entire third-ranked assassin team in the world by himself. After that, Joe called Bella, proposing to cancel the contract and was willing to give Bella $2 million without compensation. But Bella refused because Joe had killed her father years ago. Now that she finally had a chance to eliminate Joe, she didn't want to give up. She also threatened to summon all the strongest assassins in Europe to fight Joe to the death. As soon as he hung up the phone, Joe was pursued by 2 men on motorcycles. They used their bikes as weapons, charging straight at him without a word. Initially, Joe was a bit clumsy. One of them even mocked him, saying this wasn't a personal grudge, just a business deal. Joe knew that fighting on the ground was disadvantageous for him, so he picked up a steel bar, hid behind a trash can, and directly hit one of them, knocking him off his bike, then stomped on his head with his foot. The other one was furious when he saw his teammate die. After dealing with them, the two motorcycle guys immediately rode toward Ken's house. As for Bella, she had raised the bounty to 4 million and announced a global manhunt. Top assassins who were originally afraid of Joe were also hooked when they saw the 4 million. Joe quickly arrived at Ken's house, and he bandaged his wound. Ken's wife, Sonon, came over and offered to realign his bones. She had previously learned this trade at a bone-setting shop in Chinatown. Her hand strength was both accurate and stable. Ken stood by, worried sick that she might accidentally break Joe's neck. Joe suddenly cried out, but not in pain. The constant twitching in his temples suddenly became still. The overlapping vision he had for the past few days also disappeared, and so did the dizziness. He couldn't believe it and hugged Son tightly. The dizziness that had tormented him for so long finally vanished. On Bella's side, she called the assassin, Love, and prepared to help him. She sent a photo of Lucy to Love. This was the key to controlling Joe, but this help was not free. Bella had a nephew who was about to enter the assassin business, and she hoped Love would mentor him. However, when they met, Love found out that this nephew was just a loud-mouthed hip-hop kid. On the other side, Lucy received a call from Joe. He told her to quickly find a place to hide because neither of them was safe. He said he would find her after he had settled everything. Although Lucy didn't understand why she had to hide, she listened to Joe and went home to pack her things. At this moment, her phone rang again with a message from the bank. The number 500,000 euros on the screen dazzled her. Without thinking, Lucy quickly took her things and left the house. But as soon as she stepped out, she saw a big guy blocking the door. And on the other side was a skinny guy. Love said that Joe had told him to pick up his girlfriend, but Lucy knew she couldn't trust anyone now. Joe had chosen the final battle location. He also borrowed some explosives from Ken and immediately drove to an abandoned ancient castle. That was where Ken had performed his last mission. Deep in the forest, surrounded by ruined factories and broken walls. It was indeed a living coffin. He deliberately exposed his whereabouts, preparing to end everything here. But Bella was even more ruthless. She directly called Mike to summon mercenaries. Joe could take down a few arrogant guys with knives, but could he defeat a fully armed army? The assassins who were on their way quickly received information from Mike. After reading the content, they all couldn't hide their excitement, stepped on the gas harder, and sped toward the castle. Joe was busy setting up traps with explosives. He hid the explosives in discreet places and hid the wires on the corridor floor. Every step was calculated precisely. Soon after, the first assassin team rushed into the castle, raising their guns to search. Joe noticed the movement and immediately threw a grenade. A swear word was mixed with the sound of the explosion. Joe jumped downstairs to fight two assassins. Although he took down one of them, Joe had a bit of trouble dealing with the skinny assassin. When the two brothers started to cooperate, his situation became even more difficult. Seeing that Joe was being overwhelmed, the two brothers became even more arrogant. But Joe calmly pulled the trap switch and successfully used a bull's horn to kill one of the two. The other one was enraged when he saw his brother get killed. Fighting 2 against 1 might be difficult, but fighting 1-on-1 was no problem. He quickly took care of his opponent. Just as he caught his breath, 2 more female assassins attacked. Joe dodged bullets and retreated. The 2 girls continuously threw grenades, leaving him covered in dust. The 2 sides immediately engaged in a fierce gunfight. Seeing that Joe was out of ammo, 1 female assassin tried to get closer. Joe quickly pulled the woman who had been knocked out by the explosion into a corner, pulled the grenade pin on her body, then used all his strength to throw her outside. Blown into the corridor by the explosion, Joe then met another female assassin who was a dancer. The 2 immediately engaged in combat. This assassin's reactions were agile and her moves were flexible, like a dancer performing powerful steps. Joe was momentarily flustered, but with his superior physique, the opponent still couldn't truly overpower him. Seeing that their strengths were evenly matched, the 2 decided to have a sword fight. Joe, with the home field advantage, finally took down this dancer assassin after a fierce battle. Just then, Joe's phone suddenly rang. The screen showed an incoming call from Lucy. However, the voice on the other end of the line was the assassin, Love. He had also arrived and his demand was very direct. Use Lucy to threaten and kill Joe and take the 4 million. Joe decided to use himself to trade for Lucy's safety. However, before Joe could finish speaking, Mike led a team of mercenaries to the location. Joe immediately prepared himself. The mercenaries launched a surprise attack inside the mansion. They didn't realize that Joe had already dug a grave for them. It must be said that this mercenary team was quite professional. They had discovered the tripwire under their feet. But they didn't expect that the bombs could also be detonated remotely. The remaining mercenaries did not stop and continued to close in. Joe seized the opportunity and quickly took down one of them, stole his weapon, and successfully escaped through a tunnel. Love was already waiting at the tunnel exit. Joe knew Lucy was in his hands and obediently threw his weapon down. Love took out his phone, preparing to tell his subordinate to bring Lucy over. But unexpectedly, Lucy had already realized that the kid watching her was not very bright. She pretended to have a numb leg and wanted to get out of the car to walk around a bit. The kid didn't think much and let her out. Lucy deliberately fell next to a stick. While the kid wasn't paying attention, she grabbed the stick, knocked him out, stole the car, and sped toward the mansion. Just as Love was angrily shouting into his phone, a car suddenly came and crashed directly into him. Love was dazed by the impact and lay flat on the ground, unable to move. Lucy quickly yelled for Joe to get in the car. Mike saw this and fired wildly but still let the 2 of them escape. At this moment, the kid came up to Love and explained the reason, then said that maybe this profession was not for him. Love and Mike met up. Love said 4 million was not enough, he wanted 6 million. Mike said he would report to his superior. On the way, Joe told Lucy everything that had happened recently. His identity as an assassin, Bella's manhunt, all the battles, and the struggles. Lucy listened, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The man she had loved for so long was an assassin. Joe quickly explained that he only killed bad people and had already retired. Unexpectedly, Lucy said, "That's great." Because she didn't want to have a child with an assassin. She continued by saying that she was pregnant. A few nights ago, she had intended to tell Joe, but that night he asked to break up. Joe was startled. He was about to say something when Lucy suddenly collapsed onto the passenger seat. He quickly took over the steering wheel and pulled the car over. It was only then that he discovered her shoulder had been hit by a bullet. Fortunately, the wound was not deep. Joe carried her and rushed into a nearby church. Just as he was about to find something to treat the wound, a pastor came out of a room. Seeing Lucy lying on the floor, the pastor was about to help when she suddenly opened her eyes. The fainting spell was just a self-protective mechanism of her body. Seeing that Lucy was okay, Joe suddenly knelt on one knee and proposed to her. The witness to the wedding was, of course, the pastor in front of them, but the pastor had one request: Joe had to confess his sins, no matter how rushed the time was. So the two sat down in the confessional. Joe began listing his recent missions and methods of killing, which left the pastor dumbfounded. In all his years of ministry, he had never heard of such bizarre sins. But in the end, he still forgave Joe and told him not to kill anyone anymore from now on. Joe could only helplessly say that there might be a few cases of legitimate self-defense later. And so, under the pastor's witness, their wedding began. When it came to the ring exchange, Joe took out a grenade pin from his pocket and used it as the wedding ring. However, they hadn't even finished their vows when Love suddenly burst in and fired at Joe. The bullet accidentally hit the pastor. Seeing Joe's dazed look, Love arrogantly cursed. He hadn't even finished speaking when a grenade was thrown at Joe's feet. Mike, leading the mercenary team, had arrived. He said the boss didn't want to pay $6 million, so he told him to take care of Love as well. A melee immediately erupted, and Love and Joe temporarily stood on the same side, cooperating to eliminate a few mercenaries. Mike told his subordinates to go and capture Love and then, regardless of friend or foe, threw 2 grenades, killing his subordinates and sending Love flying. A nearby shelf was also blown over, falling on top of Love. Mike walked over, about to pull the trigger when he suddenly felt a chill down his spine. Mike saw he was out of ammo and started to mock him. But in the next second, his head exploded. No one expected that the person who pulled the trigger was Lucy. Joe comforted her, saying it was okay. But what Lucy cared about was Love, who was lying on the ground. After the battle, Bella was packing her bags, preparing to flee when Ken suddenly appeared behind her. She hired mercenaries to carry out an assassin's mission. Bella had violated the rules of the Assassin's Alliance. The end that awaited her was just a bullet. Finally, Joe and Lucy returned to that church. They donated money for the pastor to rebuild the church. The two held a wedding in front of everyone. Joe completely hung up his guns, washed his hands, and held Lucy's hand tightly. In the following days, there were no more pursuits or killings, only peace and happiness awaiting a new life. The movie ends here. The Killer's Game portrays the world of assassins as a fierce race in the workplace. Joe Bautista, in his role, kills people but still worries about his performance, only able to snatch some free time to be with his girlfriend. The action scenes are creatively choreographed, like the assassination scene in the opera house. The sound of the first gunshot and the swish of the dancer's hair blend seamlessly, and blood contrasts with the color of the dance dress. This design is more novel than a simple gunfight. However, the emotional line is a bit redundant. The scene where the male and female assassins fight and flirt seems a bit forced. The boss hunting down a client for a bonus. Assassins taking on missions like part-time jobs. Turning killing into a profession is actually a satire of capitalist society. No matter how unique a profession is, it will eventually become a replaceable position. What's more thought-provoking is the attitude toward violence. Joe thinks he is carrying out justice, but the pastor says killing is killing. It's just like in reality, some people believe that violence can solve problems, but they don't realize that they might have become tools for others. Assassins get a bounty after killing someone. It's also like social media celebrities who use violent content to get views. This reveals the reality that violence is being commercialized. The villains are a bit one-dimensional, besides looking cool, they don't have much depth. They leave the game too early and don't create much conflict. Overall, the film still has its highlights. Although the content is not deep enough, the perspective is quite unique, and it is also an entertaining and visually pleasing film. After watching it, you can still feel satisfied. The value of a film lies in its reputation, and the value of a film review lies in the feeling. Today's story ends here. Thank you all for watching. What did you think of this film?